Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à la session Anticipating the Future of Peace and War. This is indeed one of the GESDA initiative which I devoted quite some energy and time to it and interest as the chair of the diplomatic forum. There has been a series of workshops around that question. It's the whole question, how can we apply the GESDA methodology to this question which is central to us diplomats, peace and war. And I find it a very interesting and encouraging line of work of GESDA. And I'm very proud and honored that I can pass the baton of that work to Enrico Letta, who on the 1st of April next year will succeed me as the chair of the Diplomatic Forum of GESDA and coaching many different strands of work of GESDA, but in particular also this one. Enrico, je vous en prie.
Merci beaucoup Alexandre, un grand merci, vraiment un grand merci pour ton leadership, pour tout ce que tu as fait, tout ce que tu continueras à faire. And thank you so much. I think we are having a great panel, a great moment now. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity just to introduce the panelists. We started this year and last year with a very interesting initiative. This initiative was based on a cooperation, first of all, with SIPA, the School of Public and International Affairs at Columbia University in New York, and with the GCSP at Geneva. And I'm very pleased because we have the two leaders of the partnership, Thomas Greminger and Jean-Marie Guéhenno, who are here with us. They will take the floor at the beginning of this session to present the outcome of the two panels, the two workshops we had in Geneva and in New York. Geneva, April, New York in June. And we started working on how applying the GESDA methodology to war and peace, to the war and peace future. And as Peter just said minutes ago, this anticipation and this anticipatory work is very interesting, but also very complicated. For peace and war is more complicated than ever, I have to say. For many reasons. First reason is that when we were here last Saturday morning in this fantastic building with Renzo Piano and Fabiola Gianotti, and Renzo Piano presenting the project. And as Fabiola just said, the project is, first of all, is a bridge. And Renzo Piano just told us that he loves building bridges. He doesn't love building walls. And that was, I think, the most important part of Renzo Piano's speech. And at the same time, we were in the audience, opening our smartphones and having the horrible news coming from Israel. And of course, the idea to be here to build bridges, to work on the anticipation, the future of war and peace, and at the same time to be in this very horrible moment that we all, I think, are sharing here, pain, death, mourning for all the victims. And of course, I have to say that our workshops in Geneva and in New York were based also on the fact that we were talking about the future of, anticipatory future of war and peace, and we were having news from Ukraine in the same time. And the same for the other conflicts, the frozen conflicts and other conflicts around the world. It's not easy to talk about war and peace today, thinking in an anticipatory way, but it is necessary. And before giving the floor to Jean-Marie and to Thomas, I would like to say that we know very well that anticipating and anticipation in that field is not prediction. For a very simple reason. Anticipating and anticipation means action. And that is the core, Peter, of GESDA's values. Anticipating means action. How to understand what will happen just to be able to act now for a better tomorrow. And it is exactly what we wanted to do in these two panels in Geneva and in New York, and in this third panel here. We will have the opportunity to listen Jean-Marie and Thomas. There's no need for presentations. They are both living legends of diplomacy and of international relations. So we will listen their presentations. Then we will have a wonderful and very interesting panel. But I stop here immediately. Jean-Marie, Thomas, I ask you to join me on the stage, and Jean-Marie, you can take the floor immediately, and Thomas, you can join me on the chairs. And please join me in a great applause to our panelists.
Well, it's very difficult not to be a prisoner of the tyranny of the now, when the now is so tragic. And the now sends very confusing messages. When we look at Ukraine, when we look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine, when we look at what's happening in the Sahel, we see things that remind us of past conflicts. We see the trench warfare in Ukraine. We see the medieval barbarian actions of Hamas in Israel. But we see also high tech. We see drones. We see information warfare. And so we see that it's very important actually to take a step back and not to be, if we want to understand the conflicts of today, we must not understand them looking at the sort of rear window mirror. That is very dangerous, and that's the way to be continuously surprised. And that is the way not to be able to prevent and to anticipate future conflict. But taking a step back, taking a long-term view is not easy. It's something that requires a lot of discipline. It requires looking at trends and at a multiplicity of trends and counter-trends, and recognizing that because there are so many trends, it makes anticipation much more difficult, I would say, than in a specific sector of science. Because what we see is that the various trends that we can identify, whether it's about climate, whether it's about migration, whether it's this or that particular compartment of science, they interact with each other. And it is their interaction that makes things so difficult to anticipate. Because in a connected world, and if there is something that defines our world is connectivity, in a connected world there is much more opportunities for disruptions and surprises. In a non-connected world, you can look at events in isolation, and it's easier to think what the world will be like in 5, 10, 25 years. In a connected world, these interactions are much harder to predict. That's nevertheless what we are trying to do. That's the journey we embarked on when we conducted the 2 workshops in New York, in Geneva and in New York. And We have used a method that is well tried, the method of scenarios. We discussed it with a number of specialists of anticipation. For instance, Finland has actually a systematic approach to anticipation, and we borrowed from that method. And we decided to look at the future with two axes. Well aware that this is a reductive approach, but nevertheless it's an approach that allows us to begin to make sense of a complicated world. The first axis brings us from war to peace. It makes the point that a binary opposition between war and peace does not actually make sense, especially in our confused and ambiguous world. There are multiple ways of achieving peace, and sadly, multiple ways of waging war. There is a continuum from war to peace. And so there are a multiplicity of possible intersecting continuums, given that positive peace, as we discussed in the second workshop, has also many dimensions. So do we all have the same understanding of what peace is? Certainly not. The Western dimension is very ambitious. It includes respect for life, the existence of effective dispute resolution mechanisms recognized as legitimate, a high degree of access to equal opportunity, an absence of systemic discrimination and marginalization, and a related high degree of societal coherence around a common value system. But different parts of the world may have a different balance between these laudable goals. Some put more emphasis on social coherence, some on non-discrimination. And many people, victims of deadly conflict, would be content with a minimalist definition of peace, just the absence of war, actually. So we see that this apparently simple concept of peace, when you begin to unpack it, it leads to a multiplicity of options. And the second axis that we discussed focuses on technologies as a key variable. And the focus on data technology as a key determinant. Will there be concentration or diffusion of technology? Technology and scientific progress are a multiplier of power, and conflicts are about power. And so we thought that connecting the work on conflict with the broader approach of GESDA in the radar made sense. In the end, the transformation of conflict over centuries is strongly correlated with the evolution of societies and the evolution of technologies. The British archery that sadly defeated the French knights at Agincourt ushered in a new type of warfare, but it was also a reflection of the transformation of societies. A key difference, however, with the time of Agincourt is the speed at which transformative technologies are now advancing, in contrast to our understanding of their societal and human implications and our ability to steer them. And that's actually the raison d'être of the GESDA project, to match the speed of our understanding with the speed of the transformation. So what happened when we applied this frame of thinking to the 21st century, moving from Agincourt to 2023 and 2030 and 2040 and 2050? We asked two questions, and we explored several possible answers. The first question: will technology concentrate or disseminate power? The question arises at the national level as well as at the international level. There is very uneven distribution of technology in countries and between countries. And at the moment, what we see is a concentration of power in states and in giant corporations. And there seems to be an advantage of big entities in collecting and managing massive amounts of data. So the vision of technology as just a democratizing force, for the moment, seems to be disproved by facts. But at the same time, technology can be an equalizer for good, if it allows to leapfrog stages of economic development, but also for bad. Think of hackers, think of disinformation, think of troll farms. Attack is often much cheaper than defense. And at the international level, the same issues arise. The same technologies that were conceived by their inventors as putting society on a more equal footing can literally become drivers of inequality. The world, that is the economy, politics, access to quality education and healthcare, is digitized, except in the LDCs, where only about 25% of the population are connected, with access to the internet being heavily tilted towards financially advantaged male urban population. And we have added a new dimension to the separation between the haves and the have-nots. There are the ones who have the technology and the ones who do not have it. Technology has also created a new distance between the two superpowers and the rest of the world. China and the US, between them, own the vast majority of AI patents. What will happen in 5 or 10 years? The comparison has been made between artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, contrary to what was expected in the past, have not proliferated as much as they might have. And that's partly because of the legal framework that were put in place, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, partly because while science is now in the public domain, producing enough fissile material, mastering the engineering of nuclear bombs remain complex operations that require significant resources. Will the same apply to the new technologies? We don't know yet. And that is one area where it's going to be necessary to take a much more granular look at each segment of science. For instance, in data science, although AI algorithm may eventually be in the public domain, will the need to access and code massive amounts of data restrict the speed of AI? Will, in the long run, asymmetries created by the new technologies amplify or reduce inequalities? Answers to these questions are of crucial importance if we want to answer the second question that we ask. Does concentration of technology or diffusion of technology increase or decrease the probability of conflict? Technology, I said referring to Agincourt, is very much linked to the shape of a society. And we see today, and this was said in the previous session, that today there is a growing gap between science and the understanding of science. And actually, we are in a place that will try to reduce that gap. And that gap is full of dangers because it can create the wrong attitude towards science. It can create either sort of primitive anti-science reaction that we see sometimes. We saw it during the COVID pandemic. It can also create a kind of religious reverence towards science that is not good, that is just as bad. And so this issue of the relationship between science and society is a key one. And concentration of technology as we see it for the moment can go both ways too. It can lead to mass control that stabilize society. It can also provide tools for bellicose, social, and political manipulation on an unprecedented scale. Cognitive warfare is very different, but much more effective than traditional propaganda. In addition, it can blur the separation between war and peace, as it allows for low-intensity cyber warfare, which takes many forms: industrial theft, disruption of private sector and public data, manipulation of democratic processes, attempts at social disruption by fueling social media polarization, etc. We see that this can be a factor of conflict. And diffusion of technology can also go both ways. It can equip citizens with tools that make possible a much more informed public debate. It can also induce greater accountability of authorities, even in non-democratic regimes. Witness the changes in Iran. It can help with real-time reporting of war crimes and other human rights abuse. But it can also further fragment societies in polarized groups, equipping malevolent actors with new tools to undermine existing institutions. And it can blur the distinction between combatants and non-combatants, as every individual becomes a collector and disseminator of information. So we see it's a multifaceted challenge that we have. Now, what are the answers? I look at my watch and I see I don't have much time to give to the answers, but let me outline a few. First, the range of possible conflicts will likely expand in the future. Yes, there can be geopolitical confrontation leading to big conflict that can be facilitated by manipulation and whipping up collective passions. There can also be micro-conflict in societies where this distinction between crime and politics is eroded and where low-level violence becomes a permanent state of affairs. And these two extreme types of conflict can coexist in different parts of the world and sometimes also within a country, in the sense that you can have conflict in one part of a country and apparent peace in another. What we can be sure of is that isolated local conflicts are in all likelihood a feature of the past. Almost all conflicts now are part of a connected world and are often internationalized. What does that mean for peace? Multiple types of peace are possible because of what I said on the different balance that countries may establish between security and freedom, predictability and openness. But the choice that will be made may in turn shape societies and shape the scientific progress. We may witness a broader consolidation of an imperfect peace. That is quite a possibility. Or we may slip into one direction or another. But the key finding I would want to leave you with is that there is no preordained order. Humans have agency. And let me here quote a colleague from the MIT, Darren Acemoglu. In his book, Power and Progress, he notes that, I quote, technological choices are themselves defined by dominant visions and tend to reinforce the power and status of those whose vision is shaping technology's trajectory. In other words, they reflect and may amplify as much as they shape the power distribution in a given society. That should determine our plan of action for the future, that I would characterize as such. First, identify key inflection points for specific technologies. And that's what GESDA is doing, and that's going to be very important to have a much more granular understanding of the tipping points. Second, examine the possible interactions between different sectors of science and technology, because that's where the disruptions come from, the connection between those sectors. Third, and that's not a minor point, have more clarity on the goals we pursue. We hear of robots that look human, but what is it to be human? What are the values that we want the robots to have? That's a question that is still left to the humans. And we have to be clear about that, and we are not. And lastly, in the long-term response, we'll need to develop adequate regulatory frameworks and policy framework through a cooperative multilateral process, because what we know is that no country can address those issues, no country or group of countries can address those issues in isolation. And so we need to start that dialogue, which has started, but it's not enough, between the three major regulatory powers, so to speak, of the world. There is the United States, there is the European Union, and there is China, which is also addressing the issue. And these regulatory frameworks have different emphasis. We need to see how they can talk to each other. and Geneva is a good place to do that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Marie. Un grand merci. Et now I give the floor to Thomas Greminger for his presentation.
Thank you, Enrico. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. The Geneva Center for Security Policy is very excited to be part of this project, and I'm personally delighted to be up here with an exceptional panel and a very distinguished audience. Jean-Marie spoke of what was developed in the first 2 workshops of our joint project on the future of peace and war. I would like to elaborate on 3 insights, on 3 considerations on the meta level that I took away from these workshops. First, current global trends suggest that there is much to fear. However, if we look at the history of predictions, much of what was feared in the past about the then future did not occur. Fear, as the saying goes, is a poor advisor. Furthermore, we probably think that the world is worse off because we can see by a quick glance at our smartphones everything that is going on around the world. That said, there seems to be a cascading number of threats and challenges that are interlinked. What has been described as polycrisis. The unprecedented rapidity of technological change, its transformative effects and its existential implications have never been so extreme. At the same time, our ability to understand and hence guide technology has never lagged so far behind. And this gap creates uncertainty, it creates even fear. Move fast and break things. This quote, attributed to Mark Zuckerberg in around 2004, remained Facebook's internal motto until 2014. It was broadly seen as the dominant ethos in the digital tech industry. By 2018, the same Mark Zuckerberg was advocating for greater government regulation. By 2023, many tech leaders, including Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, signed an open letter calling for a 6-month moratorium on the development of advanced AI technologies while risks were being assessed. So within 5 years, the sentiment in a significant part of the tech industry shifted from move forward and break things to move forward with greater caution. Pause where necessary. As with new technologies, the many new unknowns in geopolitics can give rise to fear. Many of the trends are indeed threatening. Let me list some. The deficit in the requisite geopolitical will between superpowers, also the 2 greatest carbon emitters, to take action commensurate with what would be required to contain global warming to less catastrophic levels. The return of interstate war, the resurgence of the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons, and then conflict-related deaths reaching a 28-year high after breaking a 20-year decline. These fearful trends create fear-driven responses. For 8 consecutive years, defense spending globally has increased with a record-breaking increase last year in Europe of 13%. And unlike with regard to new tech threats, in geopolitics, the counter-trends are not yet so visible. But there are other trends, so-called weak signals, which perhaps deserve more attention and definitely more encouragement. Jean-Marie alluded to a few, but I would like to underline some. Here's a partial list. Global youth movements. These have dramatically changed global awareness and action on climate change and gender discrimination. On a national level, in countries as diverse as Chile and Iran, they have triggered major changes in national policy with regard to long-established injustices. The use of social media as a tool for direct democracy. Social media is indeed an effective tool for surveillance, for manipulation, and the undermining of the integrity of electoral processes. But that is not the whole story. Technology also facilitates direct grassroots activism. Social media is being used to enhance non-electoral democratic accountability. With smartphones, every human being becomes a potential journalist, a documentalist, a witness, a whistleblower, or a reporter. Social media has proven an expeditious tool to bring human rights abuses and corruption to public attention, to have real-time information on unfolding events, and thus be in a better position to influence them. For example, as climate change intensifies and there are more extreme weather events, many lives have been saved through AI-enhanced forecasting and digital tools for information dissemination. Furthermore, digital technologies allow peace processes to be far more inclusive. Digital technologies can be used to gather opinions from all stakeholders to a process. This enhances the durability of peacemaking and peace-building processes. Other weak signal trends, which I believe deserve a mention. We hear frequently of the demise of multilateralism due to global schisms. And there are indeed many signs of its diminished effectiveness. At the same time, over the past 5 years, there have been some significant normative achievements under UN auspices. Think of the Global Compact on Migration, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the Treaty on the High Seas. So, despite divisions within the UN, the Security Council has recently agreed on deploying a very important multinational security mission to Haiti. So, joint action is still possible. We hear frequently that the international order, the rules-based order, and international law are broken. A GCSB working paper written by my colleague Tobias Westner assesses the divide between war and peace as treated by international law. The paper indeed finds that international law struggles to guide appropriate state behavior. Yet, we also found that states remain committed and uphold the existing legal norms, notably of the UN Charter. These are not insignificant achievements. Therefore, the question we have to ask is not only how global discord paralyzes multilateralism, but also how to build on islands of cooperation. And I think one of the virtues of our project is the focus on the future of peace. There are quite some projects that focus exclusively on the future of war from a variety of perspectives. But very few people focus on the future of peace and how to achieve it. Indeed, I see a lot of wargaming, as if this were some sort of harmless spectator sport. But who is peace gaming? Yes, bad things do happen and bad things will happen. There seems to be a growing trend to resolve issues by force. But many of the things that occur are unexpected. And that brings me to my second point. We need to think about the future with a degree of humility. We cannot predict it. But we can try to anticipate possible scenarios. Therefore, be more humble, and in that spirit, as Jean-Marie stressed, we need to think in terms of multiple contrasting futures. Why humility? As indicated, what we usually think will happen often won't happen. The historian Lawrence Friedman, in his book, The Future of War, meticulously demonstrated how almost all past predictions on war and warfare did not come to be. Likewise, if you think of some of the major predictions that were made in our lifetimes, may have proven erroneous. With the end of the Cold War and the surge in globalization, there were many predictions that the era that began with the 1948 Treaty of Westphalia was over, and that transnational and local politics would lead to a steady decline of the nation state. But deglobalization, the rise of nationalism, reactions to COVID and migration, and the rise of populism have shown that neither the nation nor the state have lost their appeal. Take another example. In 1949, George Orwell wrote his novel 1984, predicting a form of technology which could both maximize the ability to convey propaganda while also being an instrument of surveillance. That happened, not through the large ubiquitous screens Orwell foresaw, but through more individualized and hence more pernicious content on the screens of our smartphones, tablets, and laptops. However, other predictions from the 1950s about anticipated technological breakthroughs have not yet materialized, at least not outside the laboratory. Flying cars and jetpacks, eating all our meals in the form of a pill, human colonies on the moon. Indeed, the most major transformative new technology since the invention of the printing press or the steam engine was not anticipated. The invention of digital technologies and their all-pervasive application on every aspect of public and private life. What I'm trying to say is that much of what we think will happen, including in the field of technology, will not happen, and many things we do not anticipate will happen. If we do not factor this concept of known and unknown unknowns, as well as black swan events, into our anticipation models, we will create a false sense of security. We also need to regularly go back and revise what we have anticipated based on new evidence. If that methodology is common in the hard sciences, it is perhaps pursued with less rigor in the social sciences. Which brings me to my third and final point. The paradox of our time is that we have better tools than ever to predict and to anticipate the future, while the future has also become less predictable than ever. We can model economic and demographic trends and the impact of climate change with extreme precision. We have more and better informed social and political scientists than at any other point in human history. And yet still, we know little of what will really happen. Ours is an age of systemic uncertainty. This realization was brought home to me after reading the press coverage of the recent Jackson Hole retreat of central bankers. Well, central bankers are probably some of the best informed people on our planet. And yet, with access to the best predictive and anticipatory modeling in the world, this is what they said. Christine Lagarde spoke of an era of shifts and breaks in which past regularities may no longer be a good guide. Jerome Powell said, "We are navigating by the stars under cloudy skies." In short, things have changed, but we do not really understand how. Now, one could conclude from all I have said that we should throw up our arms and seek a safe haven somewhere, since the only thing that we can predict is that the future will be uncertain. That is one response. But I think it overlooks a fundamental, crucial point that Jean-Marie made. We have agency. We have agency. The future can be changed by design. Indeed, despite the problems of the present, I think there is a political opportunity to focus on the future. The UN Summit of the Future next fall will focus the attention of world leaders on enhancing our ability to prepare for possible eventualities and reduce risks collectively that affect us all as species. We should discuss how our work can have an input into the process of preparing that summit. Colleagues, we are facing what historian Adam Tooze calls a polycrisis. If this is so, we need a polymath approach to understand and deal with it. And this is why I think that combining GCSP's understanding of geopolitics and global trends, Colombia's knowledge of the international system with the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, with GESDA, is a great way of looking over the horizon and mapping out possible futures for peace and not only for war. Together, we are better equipped and positioned to carry out strategic anticipation and work towards peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I take the opportunity, having both of you here, the two organizations who are part of our project with GESDA, to ask you in a nutshell and asking an answer in 1 minute, what is your aim for the continuity of this project? What is your, in front of you, people from different backgrounds, people coming from diplomatic sector, from scientific sector, you have business people here. What do you think can be the future of this project in a moment in which, if I may say, the big contradiction is that we are talking about the future of war and peace, and we are confronting some wars that are coming from last century, from the past, with methods of the past, with reasons of the past. What is your feeling? What is your aim? What do you expect from this exercise in the next years? Jean-Marie.
Well, as I said, I think wars are a reflection of a particular society. And the wars that we see today, yes, they reflect the past, but they reflect also a lot of new things. When you look at the presence of mercenaries, when you see the privatization of war, when you see how high-tech meets low-tech, the notion that there is a world of high-tech that is separated from the world of low-tech is definitely wrong, as we have seen just actually in the incursion from Gaza of the Hamas terrorists, who defeated low-tech. So what I expect from this project is that we are on the cusp of profound societal changes, accelerated by technology, just like the printing press transformed society. And we have to integrate that. I think the great weakness today of a lot of observers is that they are in their narrow field. They are looking at political science, or they're looking at this or that. They do not connect the dots. And my ambition in that project is to connect the dots so that we have a much more comprehensive view of the changes that are coming.
Thomas.
I think now, after piloting this approach for 1.5 years, starting with this idea that the GESDA methodology should also be applied to the future of, well, initially we said warfare and peace, but then we kind of felt we should put even a stronger emphasis on the notion of peace. I think what we can conclude after a serious attempt to conceptualize is that it makes sense to pursue that effort. But of course, now with the goal of producing concrete insights that would allow us then to better anticipate, to better regulate, technological advances, both for the good and for the bad, in terms of warfare and promoting peace. I think that is. I think we kind of have now positively tested our initial assumption, and now it's a matter of applying that with the methodology that we have developed. My vision is, that in a current peace and security environment that is dominated by confrontation, by deterrence, that this process, manages to produce some fuel for cooperation, some fuel for reintroducing notions of cooperative security into our European and global security architecture. That is my vision.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Jean-Marie. Please join me in a great applause to our two protagonists. We ask you now to leave the seats to our three panelists. I ask Funmi Olonisakin, I ask Dingley Shen, I ask Michael Muller to join me on the scene, to have altogether a conversation on the topics that we just heard. We already had this conversation because Dingley, Funmi, and Michael were part of the panels and the workshops we had in Geneva and in New York. So it's we are starting from there. You, I think, heard what Jean-Marie and Thomas just said. I would like just to start with you, Dingley, by saying that you are here coming from Fudan University, yes, from Shanghai. And of course, your role in our workshop and here, it's a role that is so crucial and so interesting, because we are all thinking that you are representing here China, but you are representing yourself here. And I'm sure that your ability to be able to give us an overview of what is happening and what is the approach in China on this topic about anticipating and about the peace and war process can be so interesting for us. If I may say, I ask you just to focus on the topic technology and technological competition, because it is clear that in the last years there's a technological competition that is taking place. This exacerbation of the technological competition is creating more and more problems in perspective, and it was one of the topics that we had at the very core of the discussions in our workshops and in the presentation of Jean-Marie and Thomas. What is your take? What are your thoughts on that?
I very much appreciate for inviting me. Somehow I lost my voice. Discussing the relationship between technology and peace. I would analyze for two stories. One is that between US and China. American considers that if a competing country would access to high level of technology, the world may not be peaceful for the benefit of America. So US launched tech war to block China to access the US originated technology, like high-level chips, etc. Indeed, that has created some negative impacts on China. So my leader will meet with US leader to discuss how to improve relationship. Therefore, the US would relax such a tech curve to some extent. U.S. Congress leader, Mr. Jack Shuck, just visited Beijing to meet with President Xi Jinping. As part of the process leading to possible Xi Jinping's participation in the APEC this year, and for a possible summit between the two presidents. So this is the relationship between technology and peace. For China, if China would have technology, the US would not have a decisive say that China has no right to reunify entire China across Taiwan Strait. It's China's internal affairs. China has all rights to settle this issue in China's manner, with or without violence, hopefully, peacefully. But the US meddling makes China so far has enabled to do this. So China has been gloomy. You are hurting me. This is the first case. China considers that the access to technology would make China to live more peacefully, to make China not be hurt by the US peacefully. And the US view is exactly opposite. You guys would have technology. The US has no peace, or a peace on China's term. So the relationship is very complicated. We discussed this. I participated in the New York workshop. And we have a very complicated map, which has just been presented by Jean-Marie. Second story is the case in Ukraine and in Israel. I work on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons for my life. Most people believe the spread of nuclear weapon technology does not make the world peaceful. I am on this camp. But some people, including a renowned professor at Columbia University, where Jean-Marie is, believe the more spread of nuclear weapon technology, the more peace the world would become. Most people don't believe in him. But probably these days, Ukraine would believe in that. If they would not abandon their nuclear weapon, it's highly unlikely Russia would send force to conduct a special operation on the territory of Ukraine to grab their land. Therefore, we see that access, availability of technology and peace. If Ukraine would have a nuclear weapon, spread technology, which is a legacy of Soviet Union, Russia may be more tolerant to Ukraine's demanding to join NATO. But another case, despite the successful denial of technology by Israel and Egypt to those on Gaza Strait, to Hamas, they only have very low level of technology. This time they use tractor to knock down the wall. They use very low-level glider to penetrate the wall. But they made it. They brought another 911 to Israel. So the access to technology may not be instrumental to peace. The peace on Israel's term. I don't buy the idea of peace on Hamas' term. But such a kind of relationship between technology and peace is very complicated. Personally, I cannot have a definite say. A more restrictive the technology has been denied, the more peace we have. I think more transcending to this term is we have to build the culture and the willingness to live peacefully. Like Arafat and lobbying peace for land. Israel grabbed the land back to Palestine. And Palestine takes some realistic view. They would be never able to bring all land defined by the UN to them back. They are unable to do this. Live realistically. But Hamas does not buy this idea. So this is another story. Whether we can define simple term between technology and peace seems to be simply impossible. So we have to both seek to deny the spread of sophisticated technology and also to build a peaceful, harmonious way to respect each other's survival, live safely, securely, and decently amongst all people between Ukraine and Russia, between mainland Chinese and Chinese living on Taiwan island, between American and Chinese, and between Palestinian and Jewish people living in Israel. I think that is the fundamental thing we have to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dingley. Funmi, I would like you to focus on the word future. You are daily in contact with students. I think among the best students in the world at King's, coming from everywhere. And we are talking about peace and war, the future in 10 years, 25 years. These students would be the protagonists at that time of the decisions that will create peace or create war. Can you elaborate a little bit about what training can change in positive the relationship between peace and war, and how do you see and where do you see in the future today's students you have daily with you working, and you have to explain then what is happening today with this unexpected, unpredictable conflicts, and with this so incredible situation that we are living today.
No, thank you. I think really we cannot think about today in the world without thinking about people, technology, and the future. And what do I mean by that? Much of the conversation we have about technology and peace or war, but mostly war in the future, has much to do with systems, processes, how the environment might change. But actually the missing piece in terms of how we build knowledge, and that's, that actually is a matter for the classroom of today. The missing piece is what about the people of the future and the question of war and peace. When we think about the people of the future, or young people, if you like, and war and peace today, even those students, when we link them with the policy world and the questions of war and peace, we're so fixated. I think it was Jean-Marie who talks about the tyranny of now. We're fixated on today, that it doesn't really matter what you do. You're going to have those Generation Z who actually we should think about for the future. They're fixed on the conflict of yesterday and of today in the classroom. But it's not for the purpose of asking what technology would help them do differently in the future. And therefore, there are three things that I think when I think of this generation and when I think of future people as a whole. And by future people, I mean those who would govern the world in 2050. Once you frame the question, how you frame the question, whether in the classroom or in policy or boardrooms, about how the perspectives of people who will govern the future will change, and that future being 2050, more than 25 years from now, then you begin to separate the youth of today and the policies of today from the potential realities of tomorrow. Technology allows you to ask that question because chronologically, you're not dealing with your 35 to 40-year-olds. You're probably dealing with the 15-year-olds in that generation to 18-year-olds, the ones who are who just registered on my campus in the last couple of weeks. And once you do that, the question you frame begins to be to study in perpetuity, if you like, that kind of age range, how they really liaise or align themselves with technology, how they begin to build solidarity, and that solidarity building does something for the kinds of institutions they engage. That is something we don't actually fix attention on most of the time. When you observe how they build solidarity, you begin to see the connection transnationally, and that's what happens on campuses like mine, where you have about 33,000 students from about 150 countries. When they build solidarity through the use of technology, but also through various forms of engagement, you begin to see how the institutions of today might not be fit for purpose. Because their reference points, sadly, apart from when they think about jobs, when they're now postgraduates, they think about the United Nations, they think about that in the classroom, but on the questions of today that bind them, the institutions of today are not necessarily what they focus on. They build solidarity or actually build conflict and whatever forms of peace they build in spite of the institutions around them. And so I think the question for us as academics, for me as an academic, which is what occupies my time as a researcher when I'm not thinking of university governance, is what methodology do we then bring to bear when we're thinking about the future of peace and war. And methodologically, therefore, we've got to take those points around the anticipation. How do you move it from war to peace is the biggest challenge of all. And you have to, therefore, think longitudinally in terms of design. You have to think about the cooperation between technology that this community of people engage and that of the kinds of systems that they're creating. Because when you see solidarity building, it can take you towards peace or war. But more often than not, because we are so infused in the tyranny of now, we do not look at what needs to be done in terms of norms and ethics that bind science and people, that begins to look at solidarity building towards peace. The question of peace is that what really sits massively at the heart of all of this, that unless, therefore, we begin to look at the gaps in it and the inequities that are generated by technology and by institutions like mine. We're not alone. They're elite institutions that build solidarity perhaps among some of the most privileged, and we try to bring in other complexities. But unless we begin to look at that and bring the majority world without thinking only about states, because states will look different, to my mind, in the future if we look at the attitudes of this generation of people that we're talking about. The majority world may not organize in the same way that we're organized today, and differences in culture, in class, in normative frameworks have to be brought into how we think about technology. I think there's much more complexity when we look at the future and we see people and not just systems and machines.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Funmi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, you are at the origin of this exercise, of this project.
Not alone.
You are one of those who created this idea and this exercise. And this exercise is at the beginning. And we heard some ideas, but the idea is to continue and to try to develop it. So what is your feeling about the fact that we are in a period of acceleration of technology, technological development, science, technology, and at the same time we are in a period of acceleration of geopolitical conflicts? Is there a link between the two aspects, or do you think that this link is absolutely not there? And if the link is there, where do you see the role of GESDA in terms of feeding the multilateral system that is, unfortunately today, in great trouble, big difficulty, because one of the big problem of all these topics is the fact that the multilateral system is today not in great shape. What is your reaction to this point?
Thank you. I think the sort of overarching insight that many people are beginning to get, thinking about the future and the connection between science and the geopolitical reality that we know today, is that we are going to be seeing, and I think I connect with that, more and more that technology will overtake ideology as the determinant factor in who is going to be the leaders in our future world. And that brings a number of insights and a number of reactions, and I agree with Funmi on a lot of what she said today. But that doesn't mean that technology is going to have just a negative impact on the geopolitics of tomorrow. Science and technology has an enormous potential to increase the geopolitical tensions that we have today, but it also offers tools and opportunities to mitigate these tensions. And the net effect depends on how we, broadly speaking, choose to harness these advancements, on the norms and rules that we will establish, and the kind of diplomatic efforts that we're going to invest in. And it can go either way, as far as I can see right now. We are not at a moment where our collective insight and our collective understanding of what is coming in terms of the technologies and the effect it's going to have on our lives in all its aspects, that as been mentioned before, it doesn't translate into action yet. And that's part of what I hope that this effort and this initiative can do. There's a whole series of areas in which we need to be really careful about how we deal with it in the future, in order to not to tilt into further conflict, and conflict that is going to be potentially infinitely more dangerous because of technology and because of the way technology is evolving in terms of autonomous weapons, in terms of all sorts of elements that we are beginning to lose a little bit control over if we're not careful. So, for example, we need to look at the resource scarcity and the competition for resources in terms of making sure that the geopolitical balance is as healthy as possible. We have to look at the technological asymmetry, the fact that a big part of our world does not have access and will not have access at the same speed as the other half or the other third or whatever the proportion is going to be, which in itself is a huge vector of potential conflict. Just as inequalities are in the economic and development sphere, the same will happen in the technological sphere. We already see now a number of uses of technology that are really pernicious, whether it's digital espionage and cyber warfare, whether it's information warfare and propaganda, whether it's the fact that the new technologies are pushing the economic disparities as well in our societies. We have to look at the ethical and normative challenges that these things will bring, and which will be part also of that inequality that we need to make sure that we bridge in some way or other. The list is long. I'm not going to get long, but you get the idea of the richness and the broadness of the issues that we collectively, because it's no longer just a matter of our leaders in the traditional sense, at the national level or otherwise. We all have a responsibility to be part of the search for those solutions in our societies at whatever level we are at, and at what level capacity that each one of us brings. And in that context, I think GESDA is an interesting evolution in terms of coming up with a tool that will address many of these things. The anticipatory approach of GESDA is a little bit like giving policy and diplomatic actors a a futuristic compass, a way forward. It allows them and will allow them to navigate the uncertain terrains of the future, which we have talked about, with greater clarity, with greater foresight, and with a greater collaborative spirit. And given the rapidly changing scientific and technological landscape, I think that such an approach is going to become completely indispensable for maintaining peace, for maintaining stability, and for the prosperity of the international world in general. And again, here, there's, GESDA is doing a lot of this already. And I might mention just a few for those of you who haven't familiarized yourself completely with what GESDA is doing and is intending to do, which is clearly anticipation and foresight. It's bridging, it's a bridge-building element between science and diplomacy. It provides policy recommendations on how these technologies are going to impact and how and those that are in charge of our communities need to address them. It helps with capacity building. It was mentioned at one point that the speed with which the new technologies are coming to us is such that most of us, certainly all of us in this room, but most of us in general, are not in a position to adapt quickly enough to the effect they will have on us, on our lives. And that is a huge challenge that we need to address, and that hopefully we can help address as well. We have to help set global standards. We have been talking, if there's one thing that has come out of the ChatGPT is a sudden awakening to the need for establishing some governance norms to make sure that we inject some ethics into the way that we deal with these new technologies, and to make sure that the equity aspect is taken in seriously, so that we create technologies not just for people who look like you and me, Enrico, but for everybody on this planet. And those, I think that in itself is a huge vector of avoiding conflict if we manage to do that in the right way. Promoting dialogue and cooperation. I said addressing the ethical implications, supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, our global roadmap for where we need to go, and that we all agree to, asymmetrically, but still, that are an incredibly important element and shows us the way forward. We help with crisis management and crisis prevention through the anticipation that we come up with. And we must also be very aware and help also with public awareness, as I just said before, and engagement on these issues. Because if we don't do that very deeply and very quickly, we are going to have problems. I stop there.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I take the opportunity of the last 2 minutes just to ask you all the three one question, the same question, because I have to choose, of course, one topic. There are many topics. We discussed some of them, but there's one topic that is strictly related to the technological development, that is the rise of mobility. Physical mobility, virtual mobility, it is one of the big changes in our life today. And mobility has an important consequence in terms of integration, people knowing each other and feeling at home in many other places. And at the same time, mobility means also raising fears about the diversity, the others, the role of the others, and maybe also not feeling at home when you are at home. And this is part of the political debate in many countries in the world, mostly in the Western world. I think this is maybe the core of the big debate in our cleavages, in our societies, and this is the topic also in many other countries. So can I ask you one thought about this topic, and how do you see this topic developed in the next future related to our exercise? Dingley.
For technological mobility, normally it's good if we can communicate faster than the speed of light. That would be great. But for political process, somehow some material speed of mobility might be better. For instance, Ukraine, Russia, and the West could sit down to negotiate what would be the win-win-win outcome for all the three parties, for an international assurance of Ukraine's security, in which Ukraine does not need to join any international alliance grouping, but still secure its border. And Russia, NATO can send some force, and the UN, in the framework, China can also make contribution to make the country secure. They need to spend lengthy time to negotiate. That would save Russia to send a force, and NATO and US run out of their ammunition to support Ukraine. So we need some measured pace of mobility.
Funmi.
That's probably the most political question of the day, because virtual mobility looks very painless, but it carries a lot of pain because of the question of inequality, and yet it is the only way anyone in the parts of the world that would never have access to the wealth of the global north can communicate. But I feel that one issue that is not on the table is the politics of physical mobility will become one of the most important terms of trade. Because for as long as the richest countries can go in and out of the poorest countries that have the natural resources to make those rich countries richer, and yet they block their countries from being visited, even for any moment of time, by those who need access to education or other things, we cannot resolve this question of peace and war. That is the crux of the matter, and that's where we have to really determine the connection between now and the future, and the connection between now and future peace at all. Thank you.
Michael.
I'll interpret the word mobility in a really broad way. We're faced with massive existential problems. There is no way that we're going to solve them unless we find ways of collaborating and working together in ways that we have never, ever done before. I mean humanity, all of us. In other words, we have to come up with new structures, so the mobility, both mental and the online and the physical, etc., has to result in a different kind of multilateralism, one that is much more collaborative, integrated, de-siloed, preventive, etc. All the nice words that we bandy about. But the fact is that we have to come into a completely different way of working together to solve these big problems. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. It's as simple as that, as far as I'm concerned. And so mobility, absolutely, but in all its forms.
I think, and I'm aware that at the end of this panel, we opened more boxes than we were able to close boxes. And I think it's the way to convince ourselves that we have to work on this track, because this track is so crucial for our future. And the desperate situations that we are experiencing today are, I think, the best boost, the best push for all of us to continue in that direction. So I would like to thank all our panelists, thank GESDA for the leadership GESDA had in creating this exercise, and I would like to thank you all for having attended this fantastic panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.